From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. Here's what's ahead. On the cattle markets this week, Lee Schulz of Iowa State University. Lee will look ahead to this Friday's USDA Cattle on Feed report, and he'll comment about the economic risks and rewards of individual cow herd expansion during this current downturn in the nation's cow herd inventory. Also today, K-State's Jenny Ifft, covering two topics. She'll look at the prospect of adding either the Supplemental Coverage Option or Enhanced Coverage Option, or both, to one's 2022 spring planted crop insurance policy. And Jenny continues her series on price risk management for you cow-calf producers. The focus this time on price hedging. All that coming up on this Agriculture Today. This is Agriculture Today, our Monday edition. Appreciate you being along with us, as we do appreciate, likewise, our guest now lending his thoughts on the cattle markets. Lee Schulz is a livestock economist at Iowa State University. Well, Lee, we can talk favorably about the cash-fed cattle trade last week in the Central Plains, up another couple of dollars. So we're seeing something of movement to the high side on a more regular basis now.
And what you're seeing is cash leading futures. And, we were up probably $2 across the board. When you looked in the South, you were in that 142 to 142 and a half, maybe 143. Here in the North, 142 to 143. You've really seen the spread between the North and the South really decline, as we've seen choice select spread really narrow. And so, when we look at futures prices, February, we actually seen Thursday made a contract high for that contract. Overall, we were up minimally for the week, but we were positive across the board on fed cattle. Feeder cattle, really what's driving this market is the mid to lightweight feeders, those feeders that are really going to hit grass as it warms up. And we're not that far out from that, so especially as you look at the South. So I think a lot of optimism when you look at feeder cattle prices. You don't got to look any further to the difference between May and August. You got about a $11 spread there currently. That shows the optimism as we get into the summer.
And what is behind this bullishness? Is this more or less just a realization of what's been anticipated with cattle numbers coming down and the market finally gravitating to the upside?
There is a lot of optimism out there, I think, and maybe the realization that the demand is holding and supplies are tightening. I will note as we look at the slaughter market, we did see this last week 663,000 head slaughtered. That's the largest we've seen here in 2022. So again, I think speaks to that demand remaining strong, but also maybe, as we continue to talk about disruptions in processing, we did see some COVID peaks in January, maybe an indication that we're moving behind that a little bit. I temper that a little bit with, I think we continue to see more cows go into slaughter, up double-digit numbers. And so part of that rise is certainly some cows in that mix.
Did want to follow up, though, boxed beef continues to decline on a week-to-week basis. Cause for worry here?
No, I think some of it's seasonal. We're kind of seeing that February dip. I mean, I really point to the grilling season. But again, I think right now we're a little bit in that slow demand period just because of the time of the year. I think full expectation is we'll see at least these levels hold. I think this last week is maybe kind of hit the low in that market and may see an uptick there.
That would be great to see. In a moment, we want to address a topic that you picked up on in a recent article on decisions as far as expanding one's cow herd. But before we get to that, there is a USDA cattle on feed report coming out this coming Friday. What's the general expectation there?
I'll maybe first start with placement numbers because placements, we typically see a pretty wide range on that. We're going to compare that to placements last January that were very, very large. And so I think we're likely to see placements below year-ago levels, but they're still going to be relatively large placements. I think there's a little bit of uncertainty there, though, because we had seen some lighter weight placements the last couple of months as we've seen regions deal with drought and the need to put those cattle on feed a little bit sooner. So I think, we're going to get a little bit better idea of how many supplies are really out there over the next couple of months. Also, we did have some challenges with some weather in January that, may have slowed a little bit of those placements. Could say the same things for marketing, likely below a year ago levels. But as I noted earlier, slaughter levels, I think, are picking up. And so the market is fairly current. Overall, I think we're probably close to year-ago levels on cattle on feed, and expectations that those will continue to dwindle here as we go throughout the next several months.
Well, we'll see what the USDA's numbers have to say on cattle on feed at week's end. Now, Lee, you have put together some thoughts in this article about making decisions on cow herd expansion on an individual herd basis now. There's been a national downswing of inventories, which is very much in keeping with the cattle cycle. The question we'll address here, is it time to look at herd expansion? You make note of the state that you serve, and that is the state of Iowa, which is running against the grain as far as that cow herd trend, you say.
This story was just sitting for me, ready to write up. Given what we've seen in the numbers, Iowa was a large year-over-year increase in beef cow numbers. That contrasts, obviously, with what we've seen nationally. Also, we've seen more replacement heifers year-over-year in the state. And when you line up the numbers next to each other, we're leading really about 2 years in that cattle inventory cycle. We hit our peak in 2017. Whereas you see in the U.S. in about 2019. So, I think a lot of that's due to just the conditions we've seen. When you look at nationally, the drought we've dealt with the last couple of years, Iowa has been dry, but we've had just enough moisture, I think, to hold some of those numbers here in the state and now start to build up on those numbers. The one thing I think I kind of note in that story, and I think which helped explain the story, is you got to realize Iowa, we have relatively high fixed costs here in the state when you think about a capital and labor charge. So there's some disincentive there to really decline the herd because we're spreading less cows over those high costs. You contrast that to some other states where maybe variable costs are much more driving that situation. And I think there you see less of that disincentive to decline the herd. Obviously, there's a lot of other factors driving that. I think the most salient factor is the drought conditions. But I think, when you take those costs into consideration, Iowa is not the lowest cost producer. But I think the situations that other states have been dealing with maybe have neutralized some of that cost disadvantage that we have here in the state.
And what's happening there, you're suggesting, could apply to producers if they're thinking about, should I expand in this market environment? You bring out variable versus fixed costs, and those make a difference as far as whether one would favor expansion here.
They do, and I think there's the forward-looking part of it. Mm-hmm. So I think, there we're in the cow-calf sector, it's looking at that capital investment there and understanding how those factors may change as we go forward. I think expectation, at least in the short term, that both those stay high relative to those costs. One other thing I would note, and I noted in the article, is understanding when I made the investment in these replacement females. So a lot of producers, they paid very high investment costs for replacement females back in 2015 and 2016. They may be culling those animals now, right? So it kind of goes against the, buy high and sell low in that scenario. So, I think that certainly enters into some of these decisions. I look at producers, I think what they are culling is probably the least productive cows, the ones with some temperament issues, things like that are the ones going on the margin currently.
One of the fundamentals, though, that you stress here is that producers have a grasp on the market value of their cows.
Certainly, and so there you're parring really against, what the value as cull animals are, which is relatively high now, much higher than I think even expectations were, as we're seeing double-digit increase year over year in cull cow slaughter levels. But also, I think that also points to the demand situation. So, it's when do I take that salvage value relative to the opportunity cost of holding on to that cow for another year or investing in a replacement female. So this is the time kind of in that cattle cycle that producers start to think about those decisions. Do I purchase replacement females? Do I raise them within my herd? And what does that look like kind of longer term or in the next part of this cattle cycle?
But final parting thought on this is so much is revolving directly around drought. That's the joker in the deck, if you will.
It certainly is. And if we see return to maybe normal conditions where, we have adequate moisture, that having those more beef cows is certainly going to pay off, right, in the form of more calves and higher marketing. But, if we see conditions deteriorate, then we're going to see, the need to, I think, reduce some of those herds. So, I think it is a little bit of a gamble. It's a little bit of a counter-cyclical behavior, but that's what cattle production is, right? I mean, it is very risky, and I think, could set up well for the state of Iowa and other states that have increased just because of what we're seeing with the national trend of tightening inventories and higher prices.
Well, this article provides plenty of fodder for thought on this consideration of cow herd expansion at this point in the cattle cycle. Iowa's beef cow herd is off and running is the title of the article. This is located at the Ag Decision Maker website at Iowa State University. In their February newsletter at that site, simply search for it. Lee, thank you as always. We appreciate your time and your input. We'll talk again soon.
Thank you.
That's Lee Schulz, livestock economist at Iowa State University, on this part of Agriculture Today. Agriculture Today continues now here on the K-State Radio Network as we're progressing ever closer to another crop production season here in Kansas. We talk more about managing that risk in your crop productivity through insurance policies available to you and a couple of options that have come to the surface here in recent years that you producers might want to ponder as we approach that insurance enrollment deadline just weeks away now. Along with us once again from the Department of Agricultural Economics here at K-State, Risk Management Specialist Jenny Ifft. What we're going to highlight today, Jenny, is the Supplemental Coverage Option and the Enhanced Coverage Option available on common crops here in Kansas. Straight to it, what are these?
Right. So the Supplemental Coverage Option has been available since the 2014 Farm Bill. A producer can use it as long as they are not enrolled or did not elect Agricultural Risk Coverage, ARC, with FSA. So if you don't have that, you can use it. And what it does is it takes your underlying policy, whatever coverage level that is, and it provides you coverage up to 86% of your expected revenue. ECO is similar, but it was only introduced last year. So we're only in the second year of this program. And what ECO, Enhanced Coverage Option, what that does, it takes you from that 86%, and it can take you up to 90 or 95%, covering a higher share of your expected revenue. Now, a key characteristic of both of these policies, they have a county-based yield or revenue trigger. So these policies are never going to be triggered by losses on your own farm.
And that's important to keep in mind because that can be misconstrued otherwise by producers.
It's a risk. There's a possibility you get a payment when you don't have a loss, or you don't get a payment when you do have a loss.
Want to talk about how well, particularly SCO has been adopted and ECO in its first go-round here. You actually have some information on that here in Kansas.
Right. I did look at use of SCO and ECO last year in 2021, and both are still at what I would call relatively low levels. So if you look at corn, in 2021, we had 221,000 acres of corn enrolled. That's about 4% of all corn that was enrolled in crop insurance. In Kansas, you had a similar amount of ECO, 194,000 acres. In some cases, producers were using these policies together, but you don't have to. So some producers might have been using them separately. We don't know how much of those are the same acres, but the big picture here is that it's a relatively small share of overall use, I would say ECO might seem small, but it's almost as big as SCO, and it's only been around for a year. You actually had higher use of soybean ECO than SCO. So there's 95,000 acres of ECO for soybeans and only 92,000 of SCO.
And one can take the policy out on grain sorghum as well. We didn't outline the eligible crops earlier, but all three are included.
All three, and any other, say oats, for example, any other major crop. These policies are usually available.
The foremost question that always comes up, will enrolling in these add-on options, if you will, actually pay off for a producer? Mm-hmm. Always hard to get at there, but you've done some processing on that very question.
Right. Well, if you crunch the numbers and you stick with the policy long enough at a consistent coverage level, the producer should come out ahead in the long run. That's how the programs are designed. So in the long run, you should get more indemnities and premiums. Of course, there's no guarantee of this. It is the typical experience. We don't know if there's going to be payments for 2021 yet. So we don't know the actual, RMA hasn't calculated the actual yields for 2021 yet. So for corn, soybean, sorghum in 2021, we don't know. Right now, if there's going to be any indemnities, they wouldn't be triggered by price. So in 2021, the harvest price was higher than the planting price or the crop insurance guarantee price. So they would have been triggered by local yield declines. And, I've heard some people say, yeah, we might see it in a few counties, but, we don't really know until RMA puts out those numbers. I did get some examples for 2022, for this year. And
you're getting here at, will these potentially now, cover the expenses of putting these crops in, which is high in the minds of producers right now when you, in particular, think about fertilization of those crops. Right.
Yeah, we had to update our K-State crop budgets this year in January because fertilizer prices had gone up so much in a couple months. So what I did was I looked at our crop budgets for corn, for non-irrigated corn in northeast Kansas for Nemaha County, and I looked at the corn budgets for irrigated corn in Finney County, and I compared those expenses to the crop insurance guarantee for a typical policy. And what I found in each case, if you're doing 75% RP, revenue protection, that's a very, very typical policy, your guarantee for that's going to be quite similar to your expenses. So in northeast Kansas, our crop budgets say your total expenses are going to be about $628 per acre. So again, that's just an average. Every producer is going to be a little bit different. But if you look at a typical crop insurance policy, my estimate was $633 per acre. So those are roughly very similar numbers. So the good news is, even with all these high expenses we have, a typical crop insurance policy will provide a guarantee that can cover those expenses. Potentially the bad news, it's not going to cover much of your profit margin. Mm-hmm. And that's where SCO or ECO could potentially play a role.
One of the variables here to keep well in mind, you stress, is that these options, SCO or ECO, they're not inexpensive. So you have to put that into the equation.
Yeah, it's there's a lot of sticker shock with these policies. If you're used to paying $10, $15, $20 an acre, you could see your premiums double easily or even more, especially if you're stacking together ECO and SCO. So the example I had for Nemaha, for your underlying policy, 75% RP, $18 per acre this year. That does reflect the higher prices we're having and the higher guarantee. But if you add on a 95% ECO endorsement, that's going to give you an extra premium of $28 per acre. So on top of that $18. So your premiums can go up quite a bit. It is going to get you that additional guarantee as well, though.
You hinted at this earlier. As one contemplates enrolling in either of these, or potentially both, they need to think about it for the longer term, you say, because the payout tends to accumulate over time.
Right. You can go a couple years without payouts. If you do have a loss, you could get a large payment or larger than usual if you use these policies. You should also have more frequent indemnities. But you go a couple years paying those high premiums, that can definitely hurt.
Producers need to walk through their own numbers, do they not, to really get a firm handle on whether or not either SCO or ECO will suit their risk management needs.
Right. And because it works so differently, it is really something you have to walk through. It's still not probably a routine decision for most producers. And the two things to really look at is, one, that county-based yield or revenue trigger. Is that going to potentially cause a problem for your operation? How closely have your own yields been correlated to your county? The other thing you just want to look at is those costs. So, for that extra guarantee you get, are those costs going to be worth it?
You actually have tools available to producers for doing that very thing, self-analysis of this.
Yes, we have updated information on Ag Manager, several maps of the county level yields across Kansas. So actual yields, expected yields for this year from 1999. You can also go and see a map of the historic likelihood of an ECO or SCO indemnity by county to get an idea. History doesn't determine what's going to happen in the future, but it does hold important information that can give you an idea for how these policies work. Also, for selected Kansas counties, what we do is we look at actual revenue versus expected revenue for over 20 years. So you can go back to any year and see what was my expected revenue in that year and what was my actual revenue. And that's going to give you another idea of the size and frequency of payouts under these policies.
All of that can help one have a frame of reference, put it that way.
We also have a spreadsheet tool, and you can go in and you can enter different yields and prices, and you can see what your payouts potentially would be.
All of that is at agmanager.info, of course. So do tap into those resources. But generally speaking, Jenny, for those who have never tried either of these endorsements, supplemental coverage option, enhanced coverage option, approach with caution, but think about their potential. Is that your message?
Yeah, I think especially this year, the fact that if say we have a local drought, so our yields go down but national prices don't go up, the profit we're seeing right now could go away. The question is for producers, is it worth the price to lock it in?
Yeah. Study that. Use the materials at agmanager.info to get some semblance of an idea whether either of these or both could augment your normal crop insurance coverage and improve your chances of protecting that revenue from that acreage. Jenny has also written up an article directly on this, High Coverage Crop Insurance Policies 2022 Considerations and the 2021 Update, which will tell you more about SCO and ECO, how they work, how they might pay off. Again, that article at agmanager.info, keeping in mind the enrollment deadline for spring-planted crop insurance is March the 15th. That's a mere 3 weeks away from tomorrow. You might include all this in your next conversation with your crop insurance provider as that deadline approaches. Jenny, thanks for covering this, but stick around if you would. After the break, we'll offer that next installment in the series you've put together on managing risk in cow-calf production. Jenny Ifft, our guest, risk management specialist, K-State Research and Extension, and we'll be back mic side with her in a moment on Agriculture Today. Stay with us. Welcome back to Agriculture Today. And if you've been along with us the last couple of Mondays, you'll know that we continue a series for you cow-calf producers on how to more effectively manage your price risk. There are alternatives to that, and we're covering those one by one in this series. Again with us today, K-State's Jenny Ifft, who's been kind enough to lend her thoughts to this. Jenny, we're now around to an option that's familiar by name to producers, hedging through the futures market, a time-honored approach, but is it good for the cow-calf operator? What are some of the things to think about here?
Right. Well, like you said, hedging has been around for a long time, but I don't believe a lot of cow-calf producers have used it, especially for the smaller operations. One thing is you have to get a contract that's 50,000 pounds, which is about 83 600-pound calves. So that might be too big for some producers, or it might be an increment that's not very convenient for some larger producers. So that's one potential consideration. You also have to have a broker, pay a commission. Those aren't too high. But there are some things you have to be able to do first to enter into these markets. If you want to get a futures contract, that's when you lock in a specific price if you're hedging. So today, August feeders are going for $186 per hundredweight. If that price sounded good to you, you could go buy a futures contract, and that would be the price that you get.
Right. It's not without risk unto itself, though.
Nope, nothing. Very few things in life are risk-free. So let's say you go out and buy that $186 futures contract. And then let's say the market goes up. In addition to being disappointed that you locked in a price that's lower than what you actually get, you could end up getting margin calls. You might have to put money into a special account because when that contract expires, you're going to have to settle at the current price. Now, if you're settling the cash market, you'll make up for that, but a margin call is protecting that. So you're going to end up with that $186 per hundredweight, and you might have to put up some extra funds in the process.
Right.
If you don't want to have to make a margin call, if you want to be able to benefit from an increase in prices, you can buy an option. So we're talking about selling feeder cattle, so that would be a put option. So again, let's look at that $186 per hundredweight. Say that price is attractive to you, and you want to make sure you get at least that much. You can buy a put option. So right now, that's going to cost you about $7.35 per hundredweight. So why would you pay that? Well, prices could go up a lot again. And so if prices go up, you could still benefit from that. An option is a right to sell. It's not an obligation to sell. So if you're willing to pay that premium for that option, you can benefit from higher prices down the road. But on the other hand, it is going to help you put in a price floor. So, it's $86 less whatever the premium it is, $7.35 in this case.
Inherent in futures and to a certain extent options as well, though, the possibility of volatile markets, and right. that's what adds to the uncertainty here.
Right. So what you're really protecting yourself in is a decline in the expected price. So I always say it's not about just whether the price is high or low. It's about whether the existing price goes lower.
So hedging is one alternative here. When you come back next week, we want to take a look at yet another alternative that's apart from anything we've discussed so far. And then we'll get into comparing it to the previous ones we've discussed, including hedging and self-insurance and the like.
Right. So next week I'll talk about livestock risk protection, and next week specifically we're going to focus on the cost. Livestock risk protection works a lot like a put option.
Right, and we'll make that comparison and to give folks an idea of how that can function for them. Jenny, continuing a good series here. Appreciate the update. Thank you.
Thank you.
And she's joining us every Monday for the next several weeks to talk over price risk management for cow-calf producers. Jenny Ifft, she's a risk management specialist, K-State Research and Extension. That'll do it for our Monday edition. Thanks for tuning in. Eric Atkinson here. This has been Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.